hearing news about the elections and those sort of things that were going on. But I never did anything about it. I didn't do anything as a child or as a teenager or as a student. I didn't do any politics at all. But when I left university, I got a job in London, came to live in Newham, because I had one or two friends here. And having moved in, I thought, well, this is my chance. I knew there would be lively politics in Newham. There was a lively Labour Party. I was a Labour Party supporter. And I thought this was an opportunity for me to get involved. So I did. And, you know, I wanted to change things. I loved then living in Newham. I love living in Newham now. But everybody can see there are things that ought to be changed. Yeah. And that was what I wanted to get stuck into and contribute to. And so I joined the party. After a few years, first of all, I became the secretary of the local constituency party, did that for 3 years, I think. Then they asked me to be a council candidate, stood for the council, became leader of the council. Did that job for 4 years, the job that the elected mayor now does. And then the previous MP, sadly, had a heart attack and died. And so I was chosen to be the Labour candidate in the by-election that followed.
Yeah, thank you. And that was Ron Layton.
It was Ron Layton.
Yeah,
that's
what
right.
What was Ron Layton like, Stephen?
I always liked him. So he was the MP from 1979 up until he died suddenly in 1994. So 15 years he was the MP. He had been a printer on The Sun, very active and committed trade unionist. That was the sort of political background for him. He was very anti-Europe. Okay. He did not like the European Union. But he chaired the Employment Select Committee in the House of Commons, which was the sort of counterpart then of the Work and Pension Select Committee, which I've chaired for the last 4 years. So an interesting bit of kind of overlap there. But I always got on well with him. I liked him. He, you know, put himself about. He didn't originally live in Newham, but he moved to Newham. He lived, I think it was in Claremont Road or somewhere like that. And people in the Labour Party liked him. I think the people in the constituency liked him. And I don't think anyone knew that he had a health problem, but you know, he did have a heart attack and suddenly died.
Well, that's it. None of us know, do we?
That's true.
I just asked because, of course, most of us will just know the name Ron Layton Way, and it's interesting, isn't it?
Did you ever come across him?
No. And I guess I just wasn't. And interestingly enough, I don't think I ever knowingly met a politician when I was younger. I became part of the East London community, or my school became part of it. And I was asked to speak at York Hall back in, I think, 1997.
97, I was there. That was the launch of Telco, wasn't it? Yeah.
And that was probably my first introduction to something almost political on a local scale. So they had their 25 years last year, didn't they?
Right, yes.
And
that's right.
Year
before last. Yeah.
Oh, Excel was because I think I do remember hearing you talk there. Now Amar has asked me to just clarify for you your current role. So you're back as chair of the select committee?
No, I'm not.
No.
So I've been the chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee for the last 4 years. But after the election, Keir Starmer appointed me a minister at the Department for Work and Pensions, which means I can't have any connection or membership with a select committee anymore. Those are for backbench members of Parliament, which I was at that time. I'm now a front bench, a member as Minister for Social Security and Disability. So I'm not in the Cabinet. The Cabinet Minister is Liz Kendall. She's the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. She has 4 ministers working for her, and I'm one of those 4. Specifically looking at disability, which is going to be a big part of my job. I've been at a school for the deaf this afternoon. Very interesting, finding out about British Sign Language and those kind of things. That's a big part of the job. I'm also the Minister responsible for universal credit, carers allowance, disability benefits, those kind of things. Not pensions, that's someone else,
Yeah.
but working age and children's benefits at the Department for Work and Pensions are
And
my
that's very
responsibility.
topical at the moment, isn't
It
it?
is.
Because
It
there's
is.
talk about the carers allowance.
There is.
Yeah. So I'm surprised no one's messaged me with specific questions on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So,
Well, that's a big issue, and it was an issue that I was very engaged with at the Select Committee. We were looking at what was going on, the problems that were being caused to people, and we said
yeah.
this needs to be sorted out. Well, I'm now the minister whose job it is to sort it out, so
Okay.
we'll see how we get on.
Yeah, balancing books and
Yeah.
Because I guess with an aging population, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a big deal, isn't it?
I mean, the big problem with carers allowance is
Yeah.
you are entitled to, if you receive carers allowance, you've got to care for somebody at least 35 hours a week,
Yeah.
but it's okay to work as well. Earn up to, at the moment, £151 per week.
Right.
If you earn £151 and a penny, your entitlement to carers allowance ends. That's it. And quite often, people who are doing a bit of work kind of accidentally,
Yeah.
maybe they get a bit of overtime or something, their earnings go above the threshold.
The truth is that's a really small amount.
It's a
isn't
tiny
it?
amount.
Yeah.
But you do then lose eligibility for carers allowance. So the problem has been that lots of people have suddenly discovered that they owe the DWP a lot of money
Yeah.
because they have been getting carers allowance when quite often inadvertently they weren't entitled to it. So that's the problem. And the terrible thing about it all is that the Department for Work and Pensions knows that they're earning more than £151 per week, but doesn't really seem to have done anything about it.
Okay.
So at the very least, we need to be telling people,
Yeah.
watch out, actually, it looks to us as though you're over the threshold, you know.
Yeah. Like you get an email from your bank to say,
Yeah,
oh, you've gone into overdraft.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, you want to be careful not to kind of threaten or frighten people,
Yeah.
but at least tell them
Yeah.
that there could be a problem here.
Yeah.
That is what we're working on at the moment.
Yeah, and it's that sharing of information that's
Yes,
often an issue,
yes,
isn't it?
it
Both
is, it
locally
is.
and nationally. I was cycling in so I work in Snaresbrook, and I cycle through Wanstead Flats, and someone had obviously tried to, look like a disgruntled student had tried to burn every bit of paper they'd written on for their A levels, and the paper was just everywhere. And it was interesting because you can get through to a real human being when you phone the City of London.
Right.
So
Yes.
you phone the Epping Forest,
Yes.
and it was so
Yes.
refreshing
Yes.
to call a number,
Yeah.
get through to an actual person,
Yeah.
just say to them, oh, this is where it is.
Yeah.
And my cycle home from work, it was all gone.
Yeah.
And I did reflect upon that, and I was like, there's so few opportunities now
Yeah.
for you to simply call a number
Yeah.
and tell someone, oh, this is the issue.
Yeah.
And I
The City of
feel-
London is a very well-resourced local authority, and they do a great job, I think, on Wanstead Flats, West
Yeah.
Ham Park. But they've got a rather luxurious setup there compared with what ordinary councils have to make do with.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it, that that's what it does come down to.
Yeah. You know, when I was leader of Newham Council on one occasion, I was invited to Mansion House to celebrate a gift that somebody had given to the City of London Corporation. It was a collection of paintings they'd
Yeah.
given. And when I was there, I discovered this collection of paintings was worth £100 million.
Wow.
And somebody just given it to the City of London. You know, if somebody gave Newham Council £100 million, well,
Yeah.
the world would be a rather different place. But it's a, they do a good job, I think, at the City of London Corporation with the resources, but they do have lots more resources than your ordinary council.
And it's nice to know that, because it'd be easy to just immediately say, oh, they're doing a better job. But once you're understanding of the resource differences, you get it a bit more, don't you?
Yeah.
And I guess we're partly lucky that part of Newham does come under their control, so it gives us a little bit more. A little bit more support.
And I think they often feel we don't really thank them enough, and they might be right. You know, West Ham Park, they do put a lot of resources into West Ham Park.
Yeah.
And they're all, whenever I talk to them about it, they're slightly grumpy that we don't say thank you as much as we should do. So if there's an opportunity to express appreciation, I know they'd be grateful.
Yeah, I thanked one of the litter pickers that I saw the other day.
Well, that makes a big difference.
I will say that is a very problematic part of the constituency, the part of Wanstead Flats just beyond Manor Park Station.
Yes.
It has become a prolific site of antisocial behaviour.
Yes.
and that's
Now, so you go past Manor Park Station. Are we talking about the left or the right?
you go north past it, and it's immediately on the left-hand side.
On the left-hand side.
That side of it has become a real hotspot for drug taking.
So beyond Capel Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just north of Capel Road.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to one of the guys. It was the litter was particularly bad on Tuesday morning, and I don't know how I ever get into work on time really, because I'm always seeing people and wanting to have a chat. But he explains that actually it's meant to be Newham's street cleaners up to 1.8 meters onto kind of the verge. But, I was like, we'd really appreciate it. As you're here, could you please? And he was a good guy,
Now, Anne-Marie, I think it's Redbridge there. There was a curious exercise many years ago that Redbridge asked the government to shift Wanstead Flats into Redbridge out of Newham. I don't know why, or why the government of the day agreed, but they did. So I think I'm right in saying that the north of Capel Road is actually Redbridge now. So it ought to be the Redbridge street sweepers who are doing it.
The sign is probably maybe just a bit.
Yes, that's true.
Beyond,
that is true. The borough sign is
the actual boundary. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
I always thought we had a bit of Wanstead Flats.
No, I don't think we do. I don't know. Maybe the Manor Park Triangle we've still got. The other side of Station Road.
Yeah.
But that side, the left-hand side of Station Road is Redbridge.
Okay, well, I know this sounds a bit like Schadenfreude, but maybe that's a good thing, because actually
we should be complaining to Redbridge Council.
Yeah, although the sad thing is I see lots of familiar faces who obviously move between that spot and Central Park.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
So there's, there's obviously quite a well-trodden path up and down the high street for the drug dealers. Anyway, sorry I've gone off on a bit of maybe a negative point there, but to bring it back to something more positive would be your perfect day in your constituency. So if you ever got a day off and you just got to stay local, where would you go? What would you do?
Right. Well, you gave me notice of this question, so I've had the chance to think about this a little bit. So, I would definitely start the day with a coffee at the Apple Cart Cafe in Plashet Park. So I always enjoy going there and have a little bit of a stroll around Plashet Park as well, because I like Plashet Park. I live very near there, and if the sun's shining, it's a very nice place to go. So I'd start off there. Then I would go down to the Trinity Centre, I think, in East Avenue. Do you know that?
I don't know.
It's 5 minutes walk from Plashet Park.
Yeah.
Down Plashet Grove, across the traffic lights and straight on. It's the big old red brick church building on the left-hand side. It's a fantastic community centre called the Trinity Centre, run by a genuine local hero called Paul Chelier. And what they do is they provide space to all sorts of groups at very reasonable rates. So typically, if somebody's starting something up in East Ham and they need a bit of space for people to meet and so on, they'll do it there. And then once they've got themselves going, they'll move out and have space elsewhere. But it's a great place.
I have heard of this through the Roma support group.
Yes, well, they were a good example.
Okay.
They were a good example, yeah. They were there for years. I do all my surgeries there. So if anyone makes an appointment to come and see me, that's where they come on a Friday morning or afternoon. There's always a lot going on in there. I think Paul does an amazing job. They keep the place absolutely immaculate. They seem to have a handyman who works there every day from about midnight until 5 a.m, and it's always completely spotless. And it's a very good place to do. So it's very accessible, very 2 minutes walk from the station, very handy, easy to get. So I'd spend a little bit of time there. Then I'd have a walk down the high street, I think, because I enjoy going down East Ham High Street. Of course, there are lots of problems down East Ham High Street. We may well talk about them. But for me, it's always a very friendly place. I enjoy campaigning and election campaigns on the high street because people just stop and talk. And I enjoy going down there and very often bump into somebody or other who will complain to me about something, but you have a good chat. And we've got some decent shops on East Ham High Street as well. We've got the Sainsbury's, we've got the Iceland, we've got the two Littles now, we've got Boots, WH Smith's, and then little shops like Alphony. I've been going to the cancer research charity shop a bit recently because I'm trying to give away some old books, and they take them there. They seem to be very well organised. I'm impressed with. So there's lots of things that I like to just pop into on East Ham High Street, and I enjoy going down there. And then maybe if it's a leisurely day, I might like another cup of coffee, and I'd stop in at Starbucks in the market hall development, which is starting to fill up. I think you and I have been there, but they seem to be doing. I was terribly worried that with Thames Water messing up our high street for so long, that development might fail. But it seems as though people are coming, and Starbucks is still there, and so hopefully that'll all work out well. So a bit of time in East Ham High Street. I'd love to call in on a school. So I enjoy visiting schools around East Ham. I enjoy talking to the children. And one of the things that always strikes me about primary school children is how strongly they feel about litter on the streets. And I don't know what happens between childhood and adulthood, or whether maybe these children, when they grow up, will still feel very strongly about litter, and maybe things will change as a result. But they're very, very hot on people shouldn't be dropping litter, and please get rid of all the litter. So I enjoy talking to children in school. And something else, so by this time, I think I'd probably go back to the Apple Cart Cafe for some lunch. By this time, we'd be getting to kind of mid-afternoon, maybe even late afternoon. So one thing I'd like to do on my perfect day is just pop back to Little Ilford, which is where I was first a councillor. I became the councillor of Little Ilford 40 years ago this year. I've still got friends there, and in fact, there's somebody there waiting for me to go and visit them at the moment. And so I was like wandering around there, having a look. Maybe I'd take my bike up there a little bit further. So that would be a fairly full day, I think, with all those things, and I would thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a nice day. Yeah, some amazing temples as well, hidden in Little Ilford.
Absolutely. Yes, that building, the temple on Browning Road, is an amazing building.
Yeah. Right. So you've mentioned some of the challenges, and so really, you mentioned the challenges along the high street, which is potentially the first reason I maybe emailed you. And you've got your political eyes, and what for you are the main challenges?
Well, I think there's a big problem that quite often people don't feel safe on East Ham High Street, especially after dark, but even sometimes in the day they don't, because there are rather intimidating groups of men hanging around, not quite clear what they're doing. They're probably drinking, and what they're getting up to doesn't seem the sort of thing that you want to be around, and so people don't feel safe in the high street. That's a big problem. There's also I've talked about this, but there's an awful lot of rubbish dumped on the streets, not just on the high street, but all over the place. And so what's one reason why I was very pleased that the Labour Party manifesto for this general election set out 5 big missions for the new government, one of which was to take back the streets, to make the streets feel safe again. And it's going to take a lot of work to do that, but I'm very glad the new government has said that is one of their top 5 things. We've got to make the streets safe, because the problem we've got in East Ham, they're not unique to East Ham.
No.
In some ways, maybe some of them are worse in our area than in others, but it's a general problem, and we've got to fix it. It's going to take some time, but at least it's at the top of the government's agenda now to do something about it.
And Stephen, locally, let's take one of those at a time, because they're just such. I think I mentioned for the next question, the 2 things you've mentioned, I think, are the 2 things at the top of almost everybody's list. And I'd like us to just think, if you don't mind now, what steps can we take? Who do we get round the table to deal? And so let's take litter first, because I think that's almost more, I feel easier potentially. And I was just chatting with a psychology teacher at school today about the psychology of littering, and you mentioned what what might turn a kind of a 10-year-old who will, passionately talk about cleaning up the streets to maybe a 13-year-old who'll drop their Haribo packet. What's the psychological change that would make that happen? And I always remember a school friend of mine, probably of a similar age, walking back down Green Street, and she threw something on the road, and I couldn't believe it. And challenged her, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And her response was, "Well, it's a dump. This is a dump anyway." And I was thinking about this the other day, and I thought, is it an expression of anger from people? Is it partly that they're taking out their frustrations, and obviously for teenagers, it could be a whole number of things that might have upset them, from, wider neighborhood issues to, just the hair not being right in the morning, or, but what is making people, you've almost got two types of littering, haven't you? You've got that, almost deliberate action of dropping your packets, and then you've got maybe the more considered fly tipping. And
I think there are quite a lot of people who think that is the system, that you take a bag of, like, very often these bags are quite neatly tied up, and somebody's put a bit of work into, and they put them by the tree on the pavement, and they think that is the system. And sure enough, Newham Council does come along and remove it. And this is the problem, in a way, that, the more the council does remove the stuff that's dumped, the more people think, oh, well, that's what you do then, and it'll get removed. So, I mean, the council does need to do a really good job on, the emptying the bins, making sure they don't accidentally tip rubbish out of the bins when they're emptying them, all that kind of thing, turn up on time, put the bins back properly when they've emptied them, all of that. And on the whole, I think Newham has done a reasonable job on that. They've changed the rota recently, and I think there've been some difficulties in the transition, but the track record is I think it's quite good on that. And when you do dump stuff, or when stuff is dumped rather, the council does come and remove it. People come round, they clear it. If you ask them to come, so that all seems to work reasonably well. But the council does need to be very good at all that. But then the other side of it is sort of educating people, persuading them not to dump the rubbish on the street. So I think it's a kind of an education job. And I'm afraid as well, they've probably got to find some people, which does happen, but they probably need to do it on a bigger scale, so that the message gets through to people. That is not what you do. And if you do, you'll be punished. But, I noticed going around Hackney a few times, you don't see the same amount of rubbish dumped on the streets these days in Hackney as we get. So I think this can be done. It's not straightforward, it's not easy, but I think it can be done, and we do need to apply our minds to it. And I hope that the government saying we want to take back the streets, I think litter needs to be part of that, because if you've got litter dumped, that makes you feel uncomfortable about the place. So we want to sort that out, and I would hope the government will get behind efforts to improve matters as well.
I hope so. I really hope so, because I think that is something that it kind of creates an element of despair for people when they step outside.
I think it does.
As you know, I'm quite a champion of litter picking. I think, us all getting out and almost setting a good example. It's, I am, but I sometimes wish that someone in Newham Council, and I always imagine Queen Elizabeth I giving a talk to armies about to set off, instilling in them this sense for our litter pickers, how important they are. And I was chatting to a guy on Burgess Road who was really disgruntled. He was kind of cursing away about the state of the streets. And when I spoke to him, he'd grown up in Plaistow, he was an older gentleman. And he was just, I think for him, it just felt like such a thankless task to pick it up, and then it's
he was picking, was he?
He was a street cleanser.
Oh right, he was an employee,
and,
right? Okay.
And he was really upset. And I think a lot of our employees are people who've grown up in the area, no longer live in the area, And it's how can you make them feel, make them feel more valued, more important, more vital, and
that their job is important, because it certainly is.
And
I mean, around I live in Plashet Grove. We had a fantastic street sweeper for years. I think he's moved on now. But he was always there. He started early in the morning. He picked up everything. He was cheerful, said hello, seemed to enjoy his work and take satisfaction. And, somebody like that with a great personality, that does make quite a big difference, I think.
Yeah, I've got to give a shout out to Austin, who's my street sweeper. He is wonderful.
Right.
And sometimes I would love Newham Council to, celebrate the heroes, essentially, because they really, when you think if the majority of people we speak to say cleaner streets would be the number one reason they might leave the area, I feel like we potentially need to raise the status of our street cleaners to, the heroes that, they need capes, and I feel that we definitely need more
to celebrate them. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that would help. Yeah.
And, to let them know how important they are, how valued they are.
Yeah.
And, create more opportunities for people to get to know their street cleansers, and have days potentially.
It does make a difference if you get the same person all the time, doesn't it? That continuity
really
helps. Yeah.
It really does. And I wonder if there's a way of facilitating that for people to get to know the street cleansers.
Yeah.
And build
that's a good idea.
That way.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. Right now, I think we've got a break in 2 minutes, so I'm just going to look now.
One point I should make, maybe we could talk about this a bit more after the break. For me, it isn't the number one thing. The thing that I've always felt most strongly about in Newham is the need to make sure our young people have got good opportunities for the future. And there's quite a lot involved in that. But ever since I've been the MP for 30 years, that's been the thing that I felt most strongly about, and we've made some really good progress, I think.
Yeah, and always, I just am in awe of the Newham teachers and the jobs that they do.
Yeah.
Something I will talk about is how do we keep those kids in Newham?
Yeah.
And so many of my classmates are no longer in the borough.
Yeah.
And I just love there to be greater buy-in, and actually Brampton have emailed Born Everywhere Made in Newham to ask us to go and speak to their students.
Oh, great.
And they want to take a degree of responsibility for the litter near Boundary Road.
Okay.
So
smashing.
That's the kind of thing that if all the schools could do,
would make a big difference.
Would be wonderful.
Would make a big difference.
So that's a question I'm going to come to later, really thinking more about our young people and instilling a sense of pride in Newham in the kids. I'm just looking. Umar has just waved. It's a thumbs up. I think that might mean we're on a break now. So we'll be.
की तरफ से बचपन में लगाई जाने वाली वैक्सीन को अच्छी तरह टेस्ट किया गया है ताकि ये मालूम किया जा सके कि वो कितनी महफूज और मुअस्सर है। आपके बच्चों की सेहत के लिए दुनिया भर के हेल्थ अथॉरिटीज ये हिफाजती टीकों को महफूज तरीन तरीकों के तौर पर तजवीज करते हैं। जब आपको अपॉइंटमेंट मिले तो बहुत जरूरी है कि बच्चे को वैक्सीनेशन लगे, लेकिन अगर वो किसी वजह से ना लग सके तो अपने जीपी प्रैक्टिस से राब्ता करें और अपॉइंटमेंट लें और बच्चे को वैक्सीनेशन लगवाएं। क्या आपके बच्चे की वैक्सीनेशन अप टू डेट है? ये आप उनके रेड बुक से या अपने जीपी प्रैक्टिस से राब्ता करके मालूम कर सकते हैं।
Have you just moved to the UK? You could open an account with a bank that understands your international needs. HSBC UK are here to lend a hand, as the Brits might say. Then you can get on with doing the important stuff like setting up bills, renting a property, getting a mobile, transferring money, and coming to terms with the weather. Start today by searching HSBC Bank Account, HSBC UK, opening up a world of opportunity. You have to be 18 or older and eligibility criteria apply. At HSBC UK, you are backed by the current account switch guarantee.
Nikah, talaq, counseling on matrimonial disputes, Islamic wills, Islamic law of inheritance, or an Islamic verdict on any other issue. The Muslim Sharia Council is at your service. We provide official certification, and our experienced and highly qualified imams are available to provide you with guidance when needed. MQI London is based at 292 to 296 Romford Road, Forest Gate. We are open from Monday to Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Or alternatively, call us now on 0208 257 1786.
Revive FM
94.0 on the radio
on your mobile
and online.
Okay, hi there, we're back. We've just been chatting about back to school lurgies that I have at the minute, so sorry if I start coughing. Stephen mentioned opportunities for young people, and that is a pretty huge topic in itself. And so I thought, rather than moving on to the next question, just to think about that a little bit more. And so we had some lovely news this week, didn't we, that 2 of our schools are in the top 10 providers for Oxbridge, which is amazing.
The schools are doing a great job, and increasingly young people from Newham are doing really, really well. And that's been a change over the time that I've been the MP. It's been very good to see. But the other part of it is making sure that there are then opportunities for those young people to move into. And that's why I'm so positive about what's going on around Stratford, what's happening to some extent or starting to happen in the docks. There is a lot of new employment coming in. University College London, that huge campus they've now got on the Queen Elizabeth Park, that's great. So there's a lot of activity, and the fact that it's on our doorstep, I think, does mean that there will be those opportunities there for young people who've grown up in the borough and want to stick around, as I hope that more and more of them will. There are things for them to do well with here rather than moving away. We want the borough to be a place where people want to live and stay. And I think the prospects for young people are a very positive change. And we need to keep it like that. It could easily go away again. The people who are delivering the great achievements in the schools, at the end, there's a fairly small number of them. They're doing a fantastic job, but it could all change. We need to keep on the case.
And education, in London, it can be a rapidly changing landscape. I've worked in schools that were once the top school in the borough, and things do really change as the ethos
personnel changes,
the population changes, and politics can sometimes play a part in that. Thinking of those opportunities and those young people, and one of my passions, which is potentially trying to reduce the massive turnover of population, and it brings me really maybe to a later question about local politicians going to schools and actually inspiring those young people. I asked it as a prelude to this. Actually, I asked my Year 9 class today, were any of them considering politics as a career? And one student did put their hand up, and I asked how many of them were considering a career in medicine, and actually 9 of them put their hand up. And I said, actually, you have the potential to help arguably a lot more people, in a very different way, but through going into politics. And sometimes I feel as though a career in politics, the truth is, Stephen, you're very well respected, but not all politicians are. And
we're not very popular people. But I mean, when I go to a school and talk about this, lots and lots of young people are really interested. Whether they carry it through, I don't know. I mean, it's quite difficult to talk about a career in politics because in the end, there's only sort of 650 MPs. We need far, far more than that willing to take on the role of local councillor, which, is quite a tough job, not particularly well supported, but makes a huge difference in the community when the councillors do their jobs well. So that's politics. It's hard to describe it as a career, but great to encourage young people to think about doing that alongside probably something else.
I wonder, you don't get many young councillors, do you?
You don't get many. You get some, but it would be great to get some more.
Can I ask your opinion on reducing the voting age?
I'm in favour of reducing the voting age to 16. I think, the evidence when it was done in Scotland for the Scottish referendum was pretty positive, that the young people who engaged were very responsible about how they did it. And given that voting amongst young people generally is not as great as amongst older people, I think extending the franchise, getting young people into voting earlier, taking an interest in all this at a time when 16 they do tend to be interested, that would be a good move.
I see it as such a massive step in the right direction. And I was chatting about this recently with someone. I said, whilst they're living at home, they know where the polling station is, they have a fixed address. Whereas if you wait till 18, when they're off to university, they're moving home, life is then often quite unstable.
That's a good point.
For a decade.
Good point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. For a lot of people, it's a time of upheaval, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think if you caught them at 16, you'd arguably get 12 more years of political engagement. Because I think if you wait till 18, it's often not until late 20s, maybe even early 30s, that people will then actually engage, because
and we certainly do lose young people from voting in a way that is quite damaging for the country. I think it sometimes means the country is being governed just in the interests of old people, because governments feel they don't need to bother too much about young people because they don't really vote anyway. So if we can find a way of bringing them in earlier, that would be a very positive change for the country, I think.
I'm not up on the manifesto. I don't know if that's something Labour are.
Yes, it is. It's part of our commitment.
That'd be great.
Not quite sure when it'll happen, but I hope it will be before the next election anyway.
I just feel that could revolutionise things, and like you say, maybe create more of a long-term attitude to the issues people are thinking about. Not to dismiss the concerns of many of the older voters as well.
No, we need everybody taking part.
I asked my year 12s the other day about that, and they were surprisingly, oh no, miss, I think we're too influenced by people on social media, and I thought, you're really selling yourself short, because I'm sure that they actually would be a massive asset.
I think we'd be pleasantly surprised. I think they take it pretty seriously.
Now, crime is a huge thing to discuss, but I feel, for talking about the future of our constituency. And I know I get told off sometimes for being very East Ham centric, but it's where I've grown up and where I live, and of course that's where you're MP for. There seems to be these amazing things happening in Stratford, in the docks, and I think we often feel a little bit forgotten. We don't feel that the creation of opportunities is happening in our constituency as much, and a lot of that's due to geography and the infrastructure that's available. But there's also, I guess, the double whammy of feeling that we're not having that, the glamorous investment of the northwest and the south of the borough, and at the same time we feel the crime, as you mentioned yourself, is really worrying. And we talked about litter and maybe how we could enthuse our street cleansers, how we could potentially become more serious about fines. And I'm wondering, when it comes to crime, and actually, if you don't mind, Stephen, before that, because I said what I'd love to, one of the goals of our group Born Everywhere Made in Newham is to inform and unite. And one of the things a lot of people are really unclear about are the different roles. And I was myself. What's the difference between the MP for East Ham, the MP for the MPs collectively, the Mayor of Newham, the CEO of Newham? If we were to think about, say, crime, a huge complex issue, who is working on that? And if you could tell me from, you've got that.
Well, let me have a go.
Perspective.
So the mayor and the chief executive are responsible for the council. The mayor for the policies of the council. The chief executive are actually running it and making sure it all happens. I don't have any formal relationship with the council at all. The council doesn't report to me. I'm not in a position to kind of tell it what to do at all. I write to the council a lot on behalf of my constituents, but I don't have any. I'm not a member of it. I don't have any formal responsibility for it. I did once. I did the job that the mayor now does as leader of the council, but that was 30 plus years ago. So it certainly isn't the position now. So my job is to represent my constituents, and often that does mean taking matters up with the council. But the focus of my work is Parliament and making the laws for the country. So the way when I go and talk to a school, I say there are really three parts to my job. Number one is helping people out in the area when they run into problems of one sort or another. And often that will involve writing a letter to the council, or writing a letter to the police, or writing a letter somewhere or other. But the second part of my job is representing East Ham to the government and saying to the government, this is what we need to make things better for us in East Ham. And then the third part of my job is trying to come up with better ways for running the country as a whole. And as a minister now at the Department for Work and Pensions, trying to make sure that our social security policy is the right one for Britain as a whole. So that's a very different sort of job to running the council.
Yeah, it is such a huge remit, isn't it? And I guess I would say, from a completely self-interested point of view, I guess thinking about number two, representing East Ham to the government. If you were to thinking specifically of crime, what would you say to Keir Starmer? If we know that pickpocketing, all manner of crimes, is particularly high here. I think it was second only to Westminster, where they have a huge amount of pickpocketing that goes on and does get reported. And whereas probably traveling around different boroughs, I would say that feeling of unease is possibly greater. And I'm quite a I wouldn't say I was timid, or but probably that feeling of unease for me is greater here, despite me knowing the area very well. And to take that back to government and say, well, this is a real issue. How would you represent East Ham? What support do you think we need?
Well, I think fundamentally we do need greater policing resources. And that, I think, is what the government is going to have to provide if it's going to deliver on this mission, one of these top 5 things, to take back the streets. I think we've got to have more police around so that when people are up to no good in East Ham High Street, there's somebody there to do something about it, which very often at the moment there just isn't. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. The country's in a bit of a poor financial state at the moment. There's quite a big repair job to be done. But I don't think we're going to be able to make the streets feel safe again without a significant increase in the resources of the police, which were, drastically reduced. I think 2011 was the biggest reduction, but in the period since then, that on its own isn't going to solve the problem. I think there are other things we need to do. Tony Blair's old slogan was that the government needs to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, and that I think is right. We've got to make sure, for example, that young people can see there's a decent future for themselves if they go the right way. I think at the moment, sometimes young people just don't see that, and so they get lured off into gangs and bad things and make the problems worse. But at its heart, I think we are going to need more in the way of policing, stronger, safer neighbourhood teams, which have been drastically cut back. And if we do that, I think we can get on top of this problem. And there's always one of my feelings about this is that it's a serious problem. It's not that difficult to fix. I mean, sorting out the education system, that's a huge undertaking, and that's been done. Sorting out the safety problem, I think, wouldn't be too difficult if we had the resources, which at the moment we don't. And the council needs to be involved. The council needs to be working with the police. There needs to be a good partnership. Newham was one of the first councils many years ago to have a sort of policing and community safety unit, which did a good job. And a big problem we've got at the moment is that the council is absolutely up against it because of the costs of temporary housing that it has to provide. Lots of people are losing their homes. Rents are going through the roof. People can't afford them. They're evicted. They become homeless. All they can do is go to the council, and the council by law then has to provide them with temporary accommodation. The costs of that are going up. So the number of people to be housed by the council is going up. The temporary accommodation costs per unit are going up, and it is absolutely massacring the council's budget. And that's, I think we're going to be hearing more about that. And it's not just Newham, although Newham is particularly severe, but it's other councils as well. And the government somehow has got to do something to fix this. There needs to be a long-term solution. Otherwise, our council is just going to be a housing provider. So there's a lot of work to be done. So I make that point because I think the chances of the council significantly increasing what it's doing in this area at the moment, it just isn't a possibility. I hope it will be a possibility in the future. But in the meantime, we need the government to get on with providing better policing resources than we've been able to provide up till now.
And Stephen, it's not just young people, is it? Because I think a lot of the crime people see quite visibly seems to be quite middle-aged people. And there's the concern about gangs from abroad using East Ham High Street as, you've almost got this organised crime. Is there much liaising, do you know, with Interpol? Is this being looked at just from a local point of view? Is it being looked at from a national point of view? Because many of us feel that East Ham seems to be at the centre of something that really does go beyond just the local pickpocketing. It very much feels like it's part of something that's much, much bigger. And I guess I do wonder, are we liaising potentially, far enough? Do we need to be looking at countries that some of the criminals may have come from and asking advice from their police systems and saying, right, do you know these gangs? How were they dealt with, where they've come from? And it's a contentious one, because you never want to label a group or a destination as criminal, and that would be very wrong to do so. But equally, to identify those patterns and just make sure that the right people are around the table. Do we have, for example, enough members of our police force who will speak the language of the predominant criminal groups? Do we have any counsellors from those groups? And that's a concern of mine. I mentioned that I'd been in touch with the Roma support group, and Sylvia, who's sometimes based at Trinity, but I met her in Bethnal Green, and thinking, well, are those groups supported? And, potentially some of the people conducting crime are actually themselves victims of crime. Many of them are victims of people trafficking and pickpocketing is simply what they are made to do. I guess it's, I guess it's saying, right, we really do need to be able to have this open and frank discussion with police, with communities, and people. Maybe, I think it's difficult for people to feel they can express their concerns in a way that is not going to create upset. And it is so hard for, politicians are looked and watched so carefully. But
I don't know quite what the police do about international liaison. I do know that when we left the European Union, we lost access to some justice databases, which is a problem, I think, because we don't have, our police don't have access to the same information that they had before. There is talk about trying to get us back into that database without going back into the EU, because we're not doing that. So let's see. And I think if we did have access to those databases, that might well help. There certainly is communication between our police and police forces elsewhere, but I suspect you're right. It's maybe not as good as it used to be, and not as good as it could be, and needs to be, to get properly on top of these problems.
And it just, I'm such a believer in, that it's really possible, if there's anywhere in the world where communities from everywhere can live peacefully and well, I do feel that it's here. And that's one of the things I love about Newham.
Your point about counsellors is an important one. We do now have a Lithuanian counsellor, which we'd never had in the past, Larissa, who does a great job on Green Street. That's very important, I think, because that has opened up communications between the council and quite a few East European communities. One of the things that always struck me is I've never come across Lithuanian organizations or Latvian organizations. There are lots of individuals, but they don't seem to form community organizations in the way that, for example, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis and Indians always have. And when you've got those organizations, you've got somebody to talk to and to work with, and that is hugely helpful. The one really great East European-based organization we've got is Spresa, the Albanian group. They've done an extraordinary job, and they're starting to work with Ukrainians now as well. So hopefully we'll have some infrastructure there. But when you canvass people from a country like Lithuania, very often I just get the sense they're not interested. They don't really feel part of the community. They certainly don't vote. They're not allowed to vote in general elections. They are allowed to vote in council elections.
I guess that's it. How do we make people who are new to the country feel very much part of the community much, much quicker? And
Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Indians, people from Africa very often have done that by getting themselves organized into groups, and then you can get somewhere. And lots of people have gone from those groups into the council and so on.
I think it's seeing the future And I think for many, as you, I spend a lot of time in Eastern Europe. So my brother lived in Bulgaria for a long time, and through that, I've got to know lots of other people from Eastern Europe, and he lectures on East European politics. I think for many, they don't see their future here, and they very much see their time in London as time to earn money, to invest back in their home country, and there's the plan that they will move back there once they've built their home, and it doesn't always happen. And I think this is where we end up with groups of people who've made that move and it hasn't worked out for them, and you often get potentially, men who've left the family back in Eastern Europe, come here with a view to earn money. It doesn't work out. The marriage breaks down. And lots of the guys that end up at New Life working with Johnny from the Bonnie Downs Church are people who have, that dream just hasn't worked for them. But like you say, rightly, there isn't necessarily the support network of the community.
No.
And I guess there's that, that shame of essentially going home and it not having worked out, and, going home having developed a drug problem, or,
I visited Vilnius once, met the British ambassador to Lithuania, and talked to her about the fact that we don't seem to have the kind of community infrastructure that is there for other communities. And she said to me that to understand why that is, I should go to this museum, which I went along, and it was the museum of the building where the KGB used to operate in Lithuania. And I think the message that she wanted to give to me was that there's been a cult, because of Lithuania, part of the Soviet Union, there was a culture of just avoiding getting involved with the authorities at all costs. It's the last thing you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And and certainly, there's no voting.
Keep a low profile.
Yeah, just keep out of it. And I think you can see that in some of what happens in our communities. I mean, I remember, when West Indians came here, their idea was very often they'd stay a few years and go back, and yet huge numbers of them stayed for the rest of their lives. I suspect that's probably going to be the case with many of those who come from Eastern Europe as well. And somehow we need to make them feel part of the community.
Yeah.
I mean, quite a few did go back to Eastern Europe when we left the EU. There was some big gaps in some of our schools after that. But others are here for the long term.
Yeah. And, I guess, Stephen, that is such a big question. How do we bring people in? And this is, for me, one of my aims with the group. How do we bring people in and make them feel part of the community?
The group is doing a fantastic job, I think. Born Everywhere, Made in Newham. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for all you do. And that is really helping to bring our community together, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're being told it's break time again. Thanks.